Hi, Maria.
Hey Benji, how are you?
I'm good. You should be able to share your screen later, but let's figure it out if it doesn't happen. How are you?
All good, all good. Long time without hearing from you.
No, we've been so busy.
Yeah,
Um,
I imagine.
yeah, are
Good.
you still in UCL in London?
Yeah, I'm still at UCL. I'm a research fellow now.
Fantastic,
Um,
fantastic.
yeah.
And Andrea met up with you.
We didn't meet because I came back on Sunday.
Oh, too
So we
bad.
just literally cross
All right.
paths.
Hey,
Um,
Jackie.
Hi, Benji and
All
everyone.
right. Yeah, I'm gonna turn on my camera too, just so I haven't let people in yet.
Okay,
Figure
great.
we'll give them a minute more. Um, and Maria, feel free to either turn off your camera first and join when you want to speak, or leave it on if you want to be on already.
great.
I haven't seen Tom or Luis, right? So let's give them a moment. I am substituting for Andrea because Andrea is feeling sick. She just got back from her Europe trip, London, and she picked up something in Cardiff. So, yeah.
Uh,
Hey,
uh,
Jackie.
hey, I hope she feels better. I know something's been going around.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. It's 10. I'm gonna let people in. Um, but and I will let them know that we will give it a minute more. Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome. We're going to wait a few minutes. This is the time where you get to be awkward and you get entertained by awkward silence. We'll give it a few more minutes as we wait for people to come in.
I love the little window, Benji.
Yeah, I know. It's a new
Looks
thing,
like
right?
you're,
It's like,
yeah, it looks like you're peeking in from
yeah, I can actually put myself right next, right on the auto rickshaw, so you feel like I'm driving the auto rickshaw.
I love it. I love it.
Zoom. Okay. Anyway. All right. If you are on, please turn off your mic. Okay. All right, let's give it another minute. If you just got on, please mute your mic, and then we will get on. Oh, wait, hold on. Okay. Okay. Tom's here. All right. Let's get started. And I'm gonna switch from okay. And I'm asking Jackie to please turn on your camera. I'm gonna welcome everyone. Welcome to this latest edition of the meet and greet with GNPT and PRISM. Special thanks to the Volvo Research and Educational Foundation for their support of these activities. And of course, Columbia Climate School and Columbia Climate School Center for Sustainable and Urban Development. I am Benji de la Peña or Benjamin de la Peña. But if you call me Benjamin, I will think that my mother is calling me and I'm in trouble. So you can address me as Ben or Benji. And so I have the privilege of welcoming you all, telling you a bit about GNPT, and then introducing the speakers for today. This is all about safety and security of popular transportation, risks, conflicts, and challenges. I am the CEO of the Shared Use Mobility Center and the chair of the Global Network for Popular Transportation, which is a project of the Shared Use Mobility Center. The goal of the Global Network for Popular Transportation is to elevate the modes that carry the most people around the world and make sure we learn more about them and that we have the right kinds of tools and incentives and to honor also and have the participation of the people who actually work in the sector so that we get more inclusive transportation, and it's a great source of employment. Let me pass you on to Jackie for her welcome, and then I will then introduce your speakers for today.
Thanks, Benji. So I'm Jackie Klopp, and I direct the Center for Sustainable Urban Development at Columbia's Climate School. And I have the privilege of facilitating the Partnership for Research on Informal and Shared Mobility, which is really an exciting research consortium with partners across the Global South, doing a lot of South-South exchange through living lab projects in different cities. And out of these living lab projects, which are in Bogotá, San Jose, Costa Rica, Mumbai, Bangkok, Beijing, also Accra, Kumasi, and Cape Town, we are getting a lot of insights into some of the challenges around what we call popular transport and shared mobility. And today, I think we're going to touch on one of the important themes that's emerging out of the living lab work, but also out of the work of really important colleagues that we connect to. So I'm just really excited to be here and part of this. We'll put the information about PRISM in the chat. And yeah, I'll just, with no further ado, move on to our speakers. So I'll pass it back to you, Benji.
Thank you so much, Jackie. And before I introduce the speakers, please use the chat and tell us, say hello, tell us who you are and where you're based, whether that's whether it's evening or daytime or late at night where you are, and tell us where you're calling from. Now I have the privilege of introducing our wonderful presenters for today. And I will bring them up one by one and then let them speak. So I will put you guys on camera briefly before it's your turn to speak. The pin, and I am looking for Tom. Tom, is your camera on?
Yes, it is.
Okay, I can't, there you are, there we go. All right, so our speakers for today are researchers really trailblazing and have been working on this sector for a number of years and have been really adding to the global knowledge of how these systems work and how they work for people and what the challenges are and probably some of the solutions. So Dr. Luis Guzman is Associate Professor at the School of Engineering at Universidad de Los Andes and the Civil and Environment Department in Bogotá, Colombia. He's got a Master's in Science from the same university and a PhD cum laude from the Universidad Politécnica de Madrid. So he will go first and I will welcome. I'll introduce our other speakers. Maria Jose Nieto is an environmental and development economist, and she's an expert in data analytics and bringing forward kind of knowledge-based strategies for social justice and sustainability. She is with UCL, University College London's Bartlett Lab. She worked for the Bogota local government and has also worked with UN Habitat and the International Organization for Migration and the CAF, or the Development Bank of Latin America and Caribbean. She's calling in from London. Tom Courtwright, our third speaker, is transportation consultant based in Kenya, and he founded with his co-conspirators Lubianza Research, one of the first places that was doing research on what drivers. If you have your mic on, please turn it off. Thank you. What's happening with boda bodas and motorcycle taxis in East Africa. He's the research director of the Africa E-Mobility Alliance and has worked with the United Nations Environmental Program, GIZ, the World Bank, and many others. He's doing his PhD at the University of Cape Town on bodas in Kampala. And so those are our three speakers. Let's welcome them all. And let me quickly then turn it over. Luis, you're going first, right? Okay, so let me get myself out of the picture and let's hope that we can share your screen. So can you go ahead and share your screen?
Perfect. Yes, I can. Thank you, Benji.
Fantastic.
Just give me a second, please. I will try to do. Perfect. My screen is on, isn't it?
Yes.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Benji. Thank you, Jackie. Hello, everyone. My name is Luis, as Benji told. And I only have 10 minutes, isn't it?
Yes.
10 minutes. Okay. I will be this quickly. Well,
I know for Latino men, that's very hard.
Okay. Okay. Well, thank you. I'm here to tell you about our amazing living lab that we are working on with Jackie and the rest of the team here in Bogota. And because the time is so short, I will focus in some specific parts of our work, but we are, of course, able to receive any questions after the presentation. I think so. So basically, just a little bit of context because, we are across the world. We are not aware about how or where are all the cities that Jackie mentioned. So we are in Bogota. Bogota is the capital of Colombia, is in the north part of the South America, and the Bogota city is just in the middle of the country. We live here more or less 8 million people. Which is around 50% of the Colombian population. And what happened inside Bogota? Well, we have a very particular spatial configuration where we can see here the urban population are super dense in the urban periphery, and the workplace location is just in the other part of the city. So we have a very high movements of transport between periphery, center, and center to periphery every day. And because of that, we have several problems of congestion. So what happened with our public transport system? Basically, I want to share with you guys these ones. Bogota went from last century, from an informal and highly disorganized system to a formal one with several complications and high costs in that time. Just for example, previously before with the formal system, there was only one driver per bus, per vehicle, and now there are between 2.5 or 3 drivers per bus. Those drivers have contracts, vacations, social security, and that's mean a high cost. Formality costs money, seriously money. So this is a very brief of the steps that the Bogota public transport system pass to between informality to formal. And also the public transport system is very important for the citizens. After health, education, and food services, the proximity to public transport system is what Bogota residents value the most. So we can see here a simple map that illustrates how is the accessibility by block to all the public transport system. So what happened with the trips? We can see here that in a regular day, we have here in the city more or less 12.5 million of trips every day. From those trips, less than 1% are considered made in informal or popular transport modes. So And as we can see here in the map, the darker areas is where the popular transport is more present in the south of the city, in the north of the city, where usually the low-income populations lives in their in the majority. Yes. So, but getting into the of work, we are currently studying 3 different modalities of popular transport. We can see here three parts of the city. These ones, that's it's basically the formal taxis, the regular taxis, are giving a service as collective taxis in a very specific part of the cities. The second one is in the urban periphery south in the city. This is the point, the star number 1. That is a very poor area of the city, located in a very steep areas. And it's working together with the first cable car that the city implemented. And the third one is this purple star, and I think this the busy taxis is the more popular transport, the more informal popular transport in the city, because besides to serve several peripheral areas, they serve as a feeder of the public transport system to try to solve the last mile issues in our city. So we studied 3 different modalities. As we can see here, there are 3 completely different organization system, fares, and drivers and users. So in our living lab, we make 2 sources of information. The first one is qualitative information that is based in focus group. We gather with the community, we meet with the 3 communities in these 3 points to talk about the concerns, the travel patterns, trip purposes, facilitators, barriers to use the informal share transport modes here. Basically, most by far of the users are belong to the lowest segment of income of populations. And we can see here that bottom line, the most important issues, the most important concerns of the users and also drivers are regarding road safety, personal security, and conflicts between operators and users. Here in the next slides, we can see here a summary about the concerns, the drivers and operators concerns regarding these 3 issues. And basically, the intersection about these concerns are about the poor, or in some cases, the bad relationships between users, drivers, the lack of institutional support and police harassment, because there are supposed not to be there. These services is not allowed by the law and by authorities, and in some cases, the drivers perceive high risks, especially because the conditioning infrastructure and the steep terrains. This slide, we talk about the users' concern about also the road safety, personal security, and conflicts. And basically, the users highlight also the poor relationship between user drivers, the unsafe of the infrastructures, and basically they are concerned also about the bad shape or about the vehicles, because there are old vehicles very old vehicles or high speeds in some places. And the respect for the traffic regulation, of course. This is the qualitative.
Being disrespectful, especially when in workplaces when they think you're like them.
Sorry,
So now they're not.
I think, okay, sorry.
One moment, sorry about that. Let's make sure that
no
everyone
problem.
is muted,
Yeah, no problem.
and then I will unmute you.
You mute. Yeah,
Yeah.
right now. Thank you. This is a summary that we already presented previously, but this is new because we have here the quantitative part. And this is quite interesting because we want to quantify why the popular transport is so attractive for some people according to the socio-demographic characteristic and their location. So to do that, we make a large survey around 380 users across those 3 points, and we find these basic socio-demographic characteristics between, as we can see here, most of the users are women. More than half of the users only have basic education, that means high school. Almost the totality of users are living in the poorest areas of the city. And the income also, the household income also is also very low. And 2/3 of our sample use the popular transport to go to work. And another important portion is used for housework or unpaid caregiving work that is in our country, that is basically made by women. Okay, and the age average is 39, 40 years. So to capture that information, we ask in our survey we make surveys online and face-to-face to collect the data, but we ask different issues. I want to show here some particular questions and answers regarding the topic of the session, that is security of the ICM system. So the first one is regarding the satisfaction of the service. And we can see here on the left, this is related with this is related with personal security. The second one is related with road safety, and the third one is related with the kindness, the friendliness, and quality of service, and the relationship between user and driver or operators. And we can see here in a scale of 1 to 5, when for instance we can see here if I am completely satisfied with the personal security, that means that I perceive the service as completely safe. In this scale, the level of user satisfaction with these three aspects changes between zones, and we also compare with the public transport. In general, we see here that users perceive the public transport, the formal public transport, as unsafe. We can see here this part here. They see that the risk of robbery and assault is higher in the formal public transport. So we can measure here. We see an important issue about the preference of ICM over public transport systems. We also ask this thing, and we see here that in general, users perceive that informal transport is not well regarded by society, but still they continue using. So, and for what we ask that? Basically for construct this model. This model, it's an hybrid discrete choice model that the previous questions we use it to construct these latent variables that is formed with several questions. For instance, what's mean in this context social cohesion. We construct this latent variable from different questions in our survey. For instance, we asked to the people the ICM contributes to the neighborhood development. Another question could be my family, friends, and relatives use the ICM, the informal transport services. Another question is the why I use the transport is influenced by friends, family, and relatives. This is social cohesion. This question used to define social cohesion. The transport needs we define with question regarding, for example, my activities require an efficient transport system, or my activities require me to move frequently around the city, or also the city transport alternatives are easy for me to use. Using that questions, we construct these latent variables. In a parallel way, we define satisfaction with ICM and public transport. What question define the satisfaction? This one in the left of the screen. If I'm satisfied with the travel times, that includes waiting times, access times, egress times, in-vehicle times, and cost, that is basically the fare, I'm satisfied with the service. If I'm satisfied with the friendliness of the operators, of drivers, I'm satisfied with the services. If I'm satisfied with road safety, with the personal security, with the comfort, with the pollution and the vehicle condition, I'm also satisfied with these services. So we mix all these variables in a discrete choice model to construct the utility functions by each transport mode. To do what? To estimate the benefit that I could get if I chose one of these alternatives. So the alternatives to choose are ICM services, public transport, or walking. Then this is a preliminary result. Then we have here some numbers. What means that numbers? Basically, ICM satisfaction, we have here 0.98, 0.85, and 1.02. That means that the most important issue for the satisfaction with ICM is security, because this number is bigger than others. Then we have the second most important issue for satisfaction with ICM is friendliness. And the third one most important is road safety. As we can see here, these values are higher than the satisfaction with public transport. That's numbers translate here. In those numbers, 62 and 1.42. And that numbers tell us in a preliminary way that the ICM satisfaction is bigger. So the probability to choose the ICM over public transport system is higher. So these preliminary results told us why the ICM services are more preferred by the citizens, by those users in that areas, that public transport system. So I think that my time is out. I'm glad
Thank you so much, Luis.
Some questions, some answers then. Thank you, Benji.
Thank you. And if you will stop screen sharing, thank you so much. we will entertain the questions at the end of the 3 presentations. Now let me turn you over to Maria and ask her to share her screen.
I will let me just see, because listening to Luis made me realize I hadn't shared any methodological slides for my presentation. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can see
Great.
your screen.
Super. So, well, first, thank you for having me here. I'm really glad to be part of this popular meet and greet, popular transport meet and greet. I'm Maria Jose Nieto, as Benji introduced me. I'm originally from Colombia, but I've been based in London for the past 8 years, and I'm part of the DPU, Development Planning Unit. I did my PhD, and I'm now a research fellow here. And today I'm gonna present basically the results from my PhD research, which was about specifically 2- and 3-wheelers in a case study in Colombia as well, in Barranquilla and Soledad, which is in the north of the country. But also some of the results that I got doing a couple of explainers about 2- and 3-wheelers for the popular transport network, specifically about personal safety and inclusion, and how 2- and 3-wheelers contribute and to these issues or present challenges. So I'll share a bit of the how. Thanks to Louis' presentation, I realized I should share a bit of the methods. And why talking specifically about 2- and 3-wheelers and not more collective forms of transport or active mobility specifically, and a bit of the key safety and inclusion issues that these types of mobility present, and some very broad and preliminary policy possibilities that can come from the results. So in terms of methods, I had, in my research specifically, I had a bit of a bunch of tools. So I did mapping. First, I started my PhD when the pandemic hit, so I couldn't do in-person research. So I started by using Google Street Views to locate the stations of the 2- and the 3-wheelers, which you could see in most of the pictures of the Street View. And then I also did tracking of with the GPS that some of the owners of the vehicles have on their 3-wheelers, not on the 2-wheelers. So on what they call in Barranquilla motocarros, which is like what we mostly know as auto rickshaws. I did surveys, but I also used the official origin destination surveys that had been done in 2012 and 2017 in the city of Barranquilla, which is, as I was saying, in the north of Colombia. You see here Barranquilla, but then Soledad is the southern city, but it's a complete conurbation. Like you cannot tell when these two things, when the two cities, when you go from one to the other one on the ground. And I tried to do mobile interviews, but the sound of the rickshaws made it impossible. So it ended up being just regular interviews with the drivers while they were waiting for a passenger. And what you see here is just a brief recording of one of the rides. So let me just try to go on. So why did I start researching 3-wheelers and 2- and 3-wheelers? It was predominantly because I could see how they connected in my hometown in Bogotá, a bit of what Luis explained, and how these were basically connecting peripheral areas and providing a service that the BRT systems that were being put in place across Colombia were not. As you can see here, it's like there's a very long queue to go into one of the BRT terminals in Barranquilla, but this one is actually in Soledad. And this means that these 3-wheelers connect peripheral and then settlements to amenities, but also to livelihoods, and serve as a source of feeding to the BRT systems, particularly because of the size that they have. So they are able to get into smaller, less developed settlements, but also they tend to be more affordable and flexible because of how their operating costs work. But they also are an alternative that is affordable for door-to-door and last-mile mobility compared to automobile taxis, so to four-wheel taxis that tend to be more costly and therefore not available for people that live in these on-serviced peripheries. So what you see on the right is a map of the BRT system in Barranquilla and Soledad, and a buffer of 300 and 500 meters from each of the stations. But predominantly interesting is the fact that in Soledad, the feeder routes do not connect east to west. So, and that's what the system of three-wheelers and two-wheelers do, is predominantly local travel. So the ones that are not destined to get to Barranquilla. In that sense, what I found is that most of the trips that are performed in three-wheelers are care-related and non-commuting trips, meaning those that are not necessarily the rush hour trips that go of people going to work, but predominantly women, as Luis was referring, but also higher age, like older adults and people with some challenges in mobility. So what you see from in the pie charts is the results of the survey that I did in Soledad. It was a representative survey with a bit of a representation of people with disabilities and people with specific characteristics of ethnicities and age. But the result is, it was relatively clear in the sense that three-wheelers serve a higher percentage of people that has difficulties moving, but also represent an option for women that prefer traveling in these, let's say, more individual transport services because of the crowded vehicles, increased chances of experiencing harassment, but also because of the nature of the majority of women's travel that are not a linear, but are multi-destination. And so there is a premium in these flexible modes, such as two and three-wheelers, for women to feel safer, but also to comply with the necessities of carrying packages and arriving to destinations that are not, let's say, close to the mass transport services. Additionally to this is the fact that they represent a facility to connect peripheral areas and are specifically targeting the needs of more vulnerable populations. It also means that two and three-wheelers' negative impact might be bared disproportionately by these transport disadvantage and low-income populations. Specifically with pollution, one of the research outputs that we got from this process was the disproportionate amount of exposure to pollution that users of three-wheelers have compared to automobiles and to buses, because of how they are open and receive all of the exhaust and all of the contaminants from the PM2 particles from other vehicles when there is congestion, but also on off-peak times and weekends is considerably higher the amount of exposure that the users of these types of services have. So it also entails that despite, like, because they connect more vulnerable population, they also might, the negative incomes might be landing on more vulnerable sides of the population. So in that sense, the key challenges for safety and exclusion specifically, was important to kind of state that crime is not something that is directly or specifically related to informal or popular transport, but it's an overarching urban issue, and that it not only affects users or might affect users, but it also, the drivers are also victims of crime and harassment by the police, especially when they are in this gray area of regulation in which there are either completely illegal as public service or have regulations at the local level, but then are banned at the national level, which is the case of Barranquilla. And this tendency to ban rather than regulate these forms of mobility means, or banning them from circulating from specific main roads, is impacting the already vulnerable population that uses them for specific needs of connection that are not addressed by the collective or the mass transport system. But it also reduces the traceability of drivers, both in the sense that drivers might not require police help when they have been harassed or victims of a crime, but also by users, because there is less visibility of what's going on and traceability from these vehicles. And finally, what I think we're pretty aware in this community that studies popular transport is the lack of evidence that is growing, but still when there's regulation happening, it's rare that there is the acknowledgement of these vehicles and specifically of those non-commuting mobilities that they serve, such as those of gendered mobilities and people with some limitations of movement. Continuing with the three more challenges was the lack of integration to the mass transport system. Despite these vehicles serving as feeders to some of the BRT lines, they are not recognized or enabled to enter the stations, and this creates issues of affordability for users that have to pay more than one tariff to access like their complete journey, but also enables overcrowding by not limiting the amount of vehicles that are able to supply a service within the city. Similarly, the limited capital and misrecognition of popular transportation in the case study means that there is no sufficient funds and there is no way of accessing official financial services for them to improve their service. So even if they want or if they have the intention to improve their vehicle or make it more safe in terms of belts, for example, of adding doors to the rickshaws, there is no sources of their capital is very limited, and then there is no source of formal financial services for them to access. Similarly, there is like a level of uncertainty about the impact that the digital platforms might have, not only on the impact, but also on the potential opportunities that they might present in terms of safety, but also in terms of the fare structure, considering these variable tariffs that you get when there's higher demands at rush hour. And what is this going to mean, and how does this impact the efficiency of the service, but also the inclusion, and when it is a service that is predominantly provided from private incentives rather than the, let's say, more of a public and social service. Based on these challenges and the findings of how three-wheelers and two-wheelers connect more vulnerable people, but also face some negative impacts, the policy, I kind of outlined 6 main policy possibilities, starting, of course, by thoroughly understanding, considering, and recognizing the functionality that the services provide, particularly in terms of non-commuting mobility, so mobilities that are not necessarily A to B and linear mobilities at rush hour, especially in relation to those that are transport disadvantaged, not only in terms of their socioeconomic conditions, but also in the locations of the city, considering that these vehicles are particularly well suited to provide door-to-door services in spaces that are not designed or are not planned for bigger vehicles to be able to access. This also is connected to the weather conditions and the topographic conditions of some of the places where these vehicles access. As Luis was saying, when there's a higher, where there's a steep incline, that's the case in Bogotá. In the case of Barranquilla and Soledad, it's a very, very high temperatures that make active mobility much more burdensome than in cities where weather would be more willing. So the first thing is kind of thoroughly understanding and paying attention to the functionality to non-commuting mobilities, and then the potential that these services have for improving accessibility for people with limited mobility, being more affordable than regular taxis, but also extremely flexible for design adaptations. I saw some examples of vehicles being adapted to even be able to put on a wheelchair inside of the rickshaw. So there is some potential there, considering that they're also already used by a higher percentage of people with disabilities, at least in the case study. And then there's the usual kind of call for integration into transport systems, making it they are already crucial for this trip, the role that they have in trip chaining. And just to conclude, the fact that there is already processes of organization within the drivers and the owners of these vehicles, but that they're very susceptible to cooptation by political power. And then there are also dynamics of power within, like between owners and drivers, that have to be very, very considered at the moment of development of policy or regulation, of design regulation. And finally, two more things in terms of safety, personal safety, say like the conscientization and the training of drivers about what actually constitutes sexual harassment. A lot of the drivers were not even aware of what was like this line, where was this line able to be traced. So there is a point on training and campaigns for this to become a more clear understanding for the drivers. And again, the importance of traceability developed from regulation rather than just prohibition of the services, considering the service that they provide in terms of connectivity. Yeah, that's about it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Maria. It's fantastic. Let's move on to the third presentation. And let me pin up Tom. And Tom, can you try sharing your screen? And you're a little washed out otherwise.
I'm a little washed out. It's an old video camera. I don't know if I have hosting ability, unless somebody can tell me where I can share screen.
You should be able to share the screen. There you go.
Yep, we're good. Okay, thanks, Benji. Hi, everyone. Good morning, good evening. So I'm going to share a little bit. I hope you're able to see my screen.
Yes.
Okay, great. So I'll be talking a little bit about 2- and 3-wheeler policy, and in particular, I'll talk a bit more about motorcycle taxis. I don't think we need to spend much time on some of these introductory slides. I think many of us are very familiar with 2- and 3-wheelers. But basically, I just wanted to make a quick note that these have been invented independently in many places, in Indonesia, in Benin, in Nigeria, in the borderlands of Uganda and Kenya. There's now something like 50 million across the world, and people use them because they're incredibly convenient, as I can testify yesterday, getting to a meeting on time. 3-wheelers, what's interesting and unique about them, as much as I focus on motorcycle taxis, I honestly think a lot more should be done on 3-wheelers. And the reason is that they provide a really interesting dual role, which is that in a lot of places, they both provide boda-boda motorcycle taxi style point-to-point, door-to-door service, but also will provide arterial shared services, acting almost like the smallest minibus you can imagine, right? People jumping in and out, going along main roads, and they play a really interesting role there, even though they all started off as rickshaws, which they're still called in some parts of the world. Why there are so many of them and they're so popular, particularly in a lot of the places many of us live in, is, of course, the fact that they're fairly cheap and affordable to get access to, or there is some kind of financing that makes it available, right? Where you're looking at anything from $20,000 to $50,000 for a bus. A motorcycle can just be $1,000, a tuk-tuk can be $3,000, and people are able to borrow money from friends and family or from motorcycle finance companies and so on in order to just get started. There's often very little operating restrictions. people just get going. They borrow from a cousin or a brother or friend who teaches them how to use it. Maybe they even use that vehicle while they save up enough to get the down payment for their own. Of course, they are very high risk, motorcycles in particular. There's really no protection. Some would say that the chassis is yourself. So that is the protection when you're on a motorcycle. Three-wheelers are viewed as being similarly dangerous, but the traffic statistics show that they are in fact safer than motorcycle taxis. So I'll get quickly kind of into the challenges and some of the policy options, and I'll talk about this generally, but also with a focus on Kampala. So as we all know, there are many challenges. Kampala is perhaps a little bit more extreme than most. So if you consider some of the basic regulatory requirements of having a driver's license, of being registered with what is called a public transport providing entity, of having a helmet and reflector jacket and all of that, the regulatory compliance amongst motorcycle taxis known as bodabodas in East Africa is 1%, which is an impressively low number. But on the flip side of that, when we think about why, and when you spend time talking to boda riders, and the next time you get on a motorcycle taxi and you ask them, what you find so much of the time is that there simply isn't much trust in the existing laws. And from a recent survey that we did at Lubyanza, so we run surveys every 3 months on motorcycle taxis in Kampala. And in our previous survey, what we found was that 2/3 of boda riders' interactions with police involved money, and 90% of those exchanges of money were irregular, more than 90%, in fact. So this means that it was an irregular amount of money. So typically, a fine should normally be 40,000 shillings or a factor of 20,000 shillings, according to law. Most interactions, boda riders are hanging over 10,000, 20,000, whatever they have. It's a negotiation. And there's also no receipt or any proof of there having been an official fine in the first place. So we can sympathize a little bit more with the lack of trust. So in terms of other, issues, we know that, of course, most vehicles today are still petrol vehicles. This is changing really quickly in Asia. It's still very nascent in Africa and in Latin America. We know that the registration processes in some places, Kampala in particular, are still more expensive and more complicated than they need to be. We know that, unfortunately, perhaps somewhat inherently to their nature, they are fairly easy to politicize. And the reason is that they're fragmented. So when you think about minibuses, you have a driver, you have a conductor, sometimes you have a toot or tout, however you pronounce it, and you have an owner, and they all have to work together in one way or another. But with motorcycle taxis, and similarly with tuk-tuks, but motorcycle taxis are particularly subject to this, they can operate by themselves, which makes them very fragmented. And they're highly visible, they're highly mobile, they talk to a lot of people every day, right, while taking people around, and they're in high numbers. So they're very quickly politicized in a lot of countries. And in general, police find that informal transport operators are a great target. Police are often underpaid, and as a result, supplement their own income by stopping informal transport operators, be they minibuses or three-wheelers or bodabodas, to supplement their income. So one of the first policy options here, and this is a real sort of baseline, is basically just registration, just understanding who is on the street. Are they registered to a stage? Do they own their motorcycle? All of this kind of information. And this would, of course, help governments say, if they're planning for the future, say, well, perhaps we do have saturation and we need to only allow, half as many new bodabodas to register or whatever, and we need to be able to implement that, right? So if there's an unregistered boda rider on the road, they should be stopped and taken off the road. Like I said, trust is a major issue. Another is that there needs to be strong policy support to make this happen. And it needs to be low cost and implementable. So on the right there is a snippet from the registration form from 2013, when the Kampala Capital City Authority attempted to require all Boda Boda riders to register. There's a number of issues that happened during that, which also had to do with things completely outside of KCCA's control. But you'll note that even on the registration form, they tell Boda riders that it is not a license to operate in Kampala. I don't think it will surprise too many of you to hear that only around 10% or less of Boda riders in Kampala were registered during this drive. Riders saw that and said, you know, why am I taking my time and money to register? And actually, this is not going to protect me at all. So obviously that is a key gap. Another option, and this is on the more punitive side perhaps, is to restrict operations. So in Ghana, for example, in Zambia, in China today, motorcycle taxis are illegal nationwide. Now in rural Ghana, and from what I understand, even occasionally in some small towns in China, they still operate illegally. But for the most part, particularly where state capacity is high, like in China, they've been able to take them off the streets. Now, less punitive or all-encompassing than that is to simply say certain areas might have high levels of theft. The unfortunate reality is that motorcycles are a fantastic getaway vehicle. There are bans against motorcycle taxis. In the Sinai Peninsula, for example, of Egypt, there are bans against motorcycles, various types of bans throughout the Sahel as well, because of their utilization by militants. And so governments might choose to ban them from certain areas or at certain times. So for example, in Nairobi, in the downtown, in the CBD, they're banned during the day. In Kampala, there was also an attempt. So in this map on the right, all those little blue dots were registered stages. And in the center of the city, you can see that there aren't any registered stages. And this is because there was an attempt at banning them from the downtown in 2020 after the first lockdown ended. That ban lasted 4 hours. So it started on a Monday morning and it didn't quite make it to lunch. And it was essentially because there was still very high demand by passengers to get in there, right? There was no alternative transportation. There was no way to get into those central areas if you weren't wealthy enough to own a car. And minibuses are slow and they don't get everywhere. And so there's a lot of demand from passengers. There's, of course, demand from drivers who also wanted to go in there and pick up passengers. Police have long negotiated with Boda Bodas for better or for worse. And that's what happened. They negotiated with them at the blockades and they went in and it ended. So in order to carry this out, you know, it's definitely not, it shouldn't be plan A. But it certainly needs to have a lot more thought through effect. So for example, when this happened in Lagos, they crushed thousands of motorcycles, right? Millions of dollars of low-income people's assets were literally crushed. And those who escaped Lagos and escaped the crushing of the motorcycles all just moved out to peri-urban areas. So it's not that they disappeared or quit their jobs. They just moved elsewhere. And so third key element I want to talk about here is about associations and unions. So they go by many names, but in order to negotiate with, like, of course, you know, we all know that in order to pass transport reform that's going to work with everyone, we need to work with informal transport operators themselves, right? Otherwise, nothing will change. Unfortunately, in some places they are quite organized and centralized, and in some places they also have leadership that is largely representative. In some cases, in many places, that is not the case. So this is generally dependent on how they're politicized in those places, whether there are patrons, whether there are like godfathers who pick certain winners, pick certain leaders to run associations that are not necessarily representative. So there was an association in Kampala in Uganda from 2010 to 2017 that was called Boda Boda 2010. And the leader of it himself was never a Boda Boda rider. he was simply picked by some people in power to run this organization, and they eventually all fell apart. So the other thing that often happens in associations and unions is they can end up falling back on some exploitative approaches to their own members, right? So these they don't necessarily have any other form of funding, and so they might start arresting their own members or levying fines on other voter riders in order to raise the income to pay for their offices and pay for their salaries. And of course, this leads to a quick downward spiral in terms of their reputation and how they are viewed by their own members. So just a couple of thoughts on this. So one is, and this is a very universal issue, which is that traffic police, people join traffic police, policemen want to become traffic police, not because they particularly love standing in the middle of the road. It's actually quite a dangerous job in that respect, but they like it because it has by far the best opportunities for supplementing their own income. So there's clearly a need for reform around that. There are only certain laws. A lot of the time, there's only certain laws that are heavily enforced. So for example, in a lot of East African countries, police will enforce driver helmet usage, but they will not enforce passenger helmet usage, which is also in the law, but it's simply not enforced. Second thing is, of course, that when engaging with associations and engaging with informal transport operators, it's best not to also use threats in the same sentence because it tends to undermine trust in whatever reform is being carried out. And finally, definitely it's important to engage with the associations and unions and leaders. It's important, though, that there's a sort of, sense check. There's time also spent truly at the grassroots, right, which is with the operators who are moving on the road, who are based at stages, because we shouldn't always assume that leaders are necessarily the most representative. And so there's a need to always kind of balance and hear all perspectives, because it is certainly not a uniform, by far not a uniform block of people. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tom. Excellent presentations all around, of course. Now we're going to open it up to questions. You can either ask your question in the chat or unmute yourself and turn on or raise your hand with a hand, the digital hand, and then I'll call on you. But first, I'll put in a few comments or questions, and then also invite the same for Jackie. Let me just get all of our panelists on, and also Jackie. There we go. All right, so a couple of quick ones. First of all, Luis, quick question. Just clarifying in your little index, the safety was kind of reversed. The more concerned they were about it, the more it was negative. Whereas the other two, like friendliness, the number was how much they liked it more. Did I read that correctly?
No, really, it's basically, or Latin variables means if I'm satisfied with personal security, if I'm satisfied with road safety, if I'm satisfied with the friendliness, we are more able to choose ICM services regarding public transport. So it's positive, and it's a proportional direction that depends on that coefficients.
Good. Thank you so much. And give us a bit more on friendliness. I think which is completely absent in transportation conversations, the human relationship, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And we've heard that a lot also for two-wheelers, particularly. I remember a speaker, and I'm blanking out on her name, Transforming Transportation last year, and she was a legislator, and she was legally blind. And she was saying for her, the fact that she can touch a person and talk to them directly was actually way better. And so she liked motorcycle taxis. But tell us about that friendliness and why that's important.
Yeah, exactly, because one interesting finding that we found in the focus group, it's in some cases users prefer that services because they feel more closeness with the driver, are familiaris, they know each other. the driver in some occasion call help to the woman to carry the bags, and that's it. Basically it's because of that we decide to measure, to ask that question in our survey.
Fantastic. Maria Jose, thank you so much for pointing out that crime or lack of safety is not endemic to popular transportation, even if that is the narrative, and it's essentially an urban problem. But would love to get your kind of insights on how do we tease that out or make people aware that, yeah, it's not just a problem. I used to always say that, for instance, sexual harassment happens in in trains too, in very developed economies. That's why they have female-only trains in Tokyo. But what are your insights on how do we disentangle that? Do we say admit that there's a problem and just address it, or do we say just to be very clear, it's an urban problem?
Well, that's an excellent question, Benji. I wish I had like a straightforward answer. I guess the first answer, as I usually think with popular transport, is better understanding of it, because at least in my experience, what there is, the vision that there is of the popular transport is very constrained to a narrative of negative portrayal of it, and very little on the actual services that they provide us, and the actual users are, as Luis was sharing, and it's my experience in the research in Soledad, they're very happy with it. I think one of my first slides is actually in Barranquilla, there's a carnival. And as if you remember from my first slides, there is like a model size, like a real size three-wheeler with all of the paraphernalia of the carnivals in the middle of a huge mall in Soledad. So it's something that the locals already kind of see as their own as part of their identity, as part of their cultural identity in Soledad, despite it being illegal at the national level. So there is this, I think that the first thing is kind of the recognition of the services that they provide without necessarily romanticizing it, because they do subject people to more exposure to pollution. There are some risks in terms of mainly motorcycle taxis, because they can ride way faster than the rickshaws, as Tom was saying. I think that's one thing that is very little talked, and that I think it should get more publicity, is the fact that rickshaws can only reach 50 kilometers per hour. And as we know in transport, like that matters a lot in the fatality of an accident and the injuries that it can cause. So, because like my answer is like more knowledge, no, like more understanding and recognition, mainly actual recognition of the services that they are providing, and not like arriving as if we were working in a blank slate when we deal with transport, right? In the formalization of it, I'd say, with quotes.
Thank you so much. And on that note, Tom, right, thank you for pointing out in at least the regions that you're researching, despite the narrative, crashes and injuries from deaths from boda-bodas, motorcycle taxis are actually lower, right, than the rest of the other modes. So thank you for that. And I think that's something we need to bring out. The other, I think, is that your concentration, or you're bringing out the role of corruption and the police, right, in both the costs for operation and the the risks of being politicized and all of that. And I don't suppose you would have solutions, but from the boda riders that you've talked to, do they have kind of their own ideas of how we could kind of solve this corruption issue for them? Have you heard anything or any insights on that? Or is it like government has to do something about it?
Well, I suppose it's my fault for bringing that up with at least one KCCA person in the audience. I'm trying to make sure I can get back to Kampala very soon. But you know what I hear the most from riders is definitely it's about their own leadership. It's so basically what often happens is at both stages, that is to say, like the parking spots and also in the associations. Oftentimes a leader takes power, somebody who already has, like, charisma and some actual support, but they take power and say that they will have an election in 3 years or 4 years or 5 years, and no other election ever happens until there's some sort of popular revolt within the ranks. So that's something that was one of the most consistent things that's come up when we've asked writers what kind of reforms do they want to see. The other thing that writers mention is simply that, you know, they feel the police are exploitative. Now, voter writers themselves, you know, it's not really their problem to solve. When I've spoken to police commanders, what they have said is, I mean, they themselves recognize that police are sort of underpaid. You know, that earnings are quite low. You know, we're talking $100 a month or less. So some of this is frankly very difficult to avoid. I mean, I you know, would love to hear from some more sort of police reform experts on this. But I think until you solve some of that, yeah, it's very hard.
Thank you. Another note for Maria Jose Nieto, I like that the cultural aspect, right? And I can bet you there are songs or poetry or art about popular transportation. Is another thing we basically ignore. I've got a question. Jackie, you may have questions, but I can turn to the questions in the chat.
Yeah, no, I just very quickly just want to say how important this research is, because there are such discriminatory ideas around these forms of transport, and just a lot of assumptions that a lot of the transport planners and regulatory authorities make based on very little data and research. So what all of your research has done is really reversed a lot of really problematic assumptions in the places that you're working. So congratulations on this really path-breaking research. I am very curious about how you plan to present this work to regulators and policymakers. And there is this theme of needing, you know, to emphasize more public recognition. So I'm one, but maybe not what is understood as formalization. That's come up in other research. Our Mumbai Living Lab as well has found that. So I'm curious, what would that consist of? And maybe then I'm just going to say that what could be an interesting follow-up project would be also to estimate the value to these cities in terms of inclusion and services that they don't provide, that these forms of transport are providing. And, you know, being able to show that and package that as a way to move away from these negative ideas and approaches to these sectors. So that's just there's a comment with some questions maybe folded in, and I'll stop there so we can go also, maybe if you have a brief reaction, that would be great. And then I'd love to hear from your responses to these wonderful questions in the chat.
I just want to say something that is your question, Jackie, is quite important, because I don't know, in our case, in a first approach with the local authorities, the popular transport is not an issue, right? They don't want to know nothing about that. So for online, I don't know. We have to looking for more in the data, talking with the stakeholders, talking with the users, inside the Living Lab to trying to do something about that.
That's an interesting point. What gets measured gets managed, right? And if they have to measure it, then that means they have to respond to it. I'm gonna turn to the question from Shahan to Tom in the chat. Curious to hear your perspective on how and when authorities might selectively enforce rules or turn a blind eye. And I guess I would say, is that at the agency level or the individual enforcer level, particularly when it's convenient or it aligns with their interests, with, I guess, the agency's interests. Have you encountered situations like this in your work, and how do you interpret those choices? And Ahmed, I'm not sure whether choices you mean for the agency or choices for the operator of the popular transportation.
Thanks, Shahan. Thanks, Benji. Yeah, really great question. So I think partly I see that you've started to answer the question yourself, such as saying that when it's convenient or aligns with their interests. So yes, very much so. I think that one of the things I see is that optimally they're going to go for something where compliance is it's not 99% and it's not 1%, right? Because if it's 1%, that means that almost no boater riders are doing it. And so if they try arresting boater riders for it, they might be able to garner sympathy from other riders on the road. And that's what they really don't want, that because that can be dangerous. And if it's 99%, then they're just not going to catch many of them, right? So that's why driver helmets in particular, I think, are really a great target for them. And that's why they tend to target that a lot, because it's something where we see compliance in Kampala is, depending where you are in the city, anywhere from 60 to 90%, which means that on the road, you will always see some guy who doesn't have a helmet, but enough have a helmet that it's clearly the norm. And there's also a very obvious safety benefit, and it's something that has always been enforced. And so that has always been enforced. Another, one of the reasons there's no passenger helmet enforcement is not only the fact that passenger helmet compliance is only 1% in Kampala, but also the fact that there have actually been direct orders from the very top of the government to not enforce that. And as a result, it's been dropped. And then what you see is that there'll be occasional crackdowns. So either a new security chief comes in or something like this, or simply they feel it's, boater riders are getting too lax. And so there'll be, every 6 months or every year, there'll be a 1 or 2 week operation, and then they will also enforce things like driver's licenses, or they'll enforce stages that are not registered by government, and chase people from there. So it really depends, but I mean, that's a really, really interesting question.
Thanks, Tom. Jean Naika adds that it's easier for the riders to pay a bribe than have these motorcycles confiscated. The process to recover them is stressful. And just as a comment on that, these are usually traffic infractions, right? And imagine if we apply this to private car owners, that if you have a traffic infraction, we confiscate your car, or to any sort of business, because these are livelihoods, that if you get an infraction, then we take away your livelihood. So, but I wondered for both Maria and Luis, if you have reactions to that. Is that partly a problem too in Bogota, where the punishment is usually the taking away of the livelihood?
I would say the interesting thing in Colombia is that you have a law that is a national law who enables, prohibits these vehicles to provide public services in cities that are more than 50,000 inhabitants. But then local authorities have had to deal with the services, or at least this is the case in Soledad, where you have 6,000 three-wheelers operating. So you have a system of color, and they call it piqui color, which is like if you're a specific color, you cannot ride in specific days of the week as a three-wheeler. So there is regulation at the local level and recognition, but then nationally they're illegal. So that means that the local authorities risk being punished by controlling how the operation of these services works. And then they do so by national transport code. They have to impound the vehicle, and the punishment for the second time that you're found providing this service in your motorcycle or your rickshaw is the same as driving inebriated. So you're punishing a person for providing a service at the same level as you're punishing someone that is driving drunk, which it kind of tells you how the level of unfairness. I don't know, that's specifically in Barranquilla. So it's a national law that works with the local law. So there's also that kind of, if you were to address this process, you would have to deal with not just with the local authority, with the Ministry of Transport, and how this works as a multi-level governance issue.
Yes, just to complement that, sorry, Benji, we have, as Maria Jose says, we have a lot of laws. We have many laws. The problem is to enforce them. So I think that I saw some question in the chat about regulation and whatever. I think the regulation is a step that is so far to fix the problem. It's the I don't know how to say it to put in formal words, but the regulation is the least of our problems. We have more interesting problems to solve in the popular informal transport beyond laws.
I think that's an excellent point, and very often the questions are like safety again, and then how do you enforce, but not enough on understanding, well, what causes the safety issues, right? And what's driving that. There was very interesting, I'm just going to say, very interesting piece in the conversation about research that what I think done in, I'm not sure, Uganda, so might have been Kampala. And they, this researcher, I'm going to put the link on, looked at providing incentives for safer driving. And what was interesting was the men, mostly men drivers, would rather that it was a well-known thing that they were getting incentives and subsidies to drive safer, because then they had a reason to. And so the research was showing that masculinity, or at least toxic masculinity, had this role in the kind of aggressive driving. So I think that that's just very, very interesting. Okay, I think we have time for 2 more questions. I'm going to put together Grace Naluquago. I hope I said that right. 2 questions. How can government support or utilize resources consistently so that you can ban boda-bodas from encroaching on pedestrian pathways, sidewalks, I guess, and non-motorized transport corridors? I think Luis may have something to say because Bogota has those large bike avenues that they built out, right? And then she also asked, you know, how did you conduct the head counts of boda-boda versus cars and pedestrian cyclists? How did you do this in Kampala or in Bogota? Okay. Does any of my panelists want to volunteer? Well, I'll jump to another question then. One of the other questions was from Ryan Arthur. Tell us about, and this is, I guess, to everyone, the move to digital apps. How is that going, and does that actually reduce theft, or does it even, I'll add to it, right, reduce corruption? What do you think? Are digital apps helping or not helping?
I have another comment. Sorry.
Oh, okay. Just quickly, in Nairobi, the wives of policemen get a lot of money on their M-Pesa accounts. So police know that they can't have M-Pesa, which is the mobile money. They can't have receipts showing that people have been sending money to them. And so they have people send money to their wives. So there's always a way around it. In terms of direct theft of cash, I think it has helped. But actually what I see around here is that the biggest and definitely the most dangerous theft isn't necessarily of cash, but it's of the motorcycles. And there's very often violence. So that's actually one of the biggest and most common forms of assaulted robbery. In fact, assaulted theft, violent theft of a motorcycle is its own category of crime in Uganda. So that remains a big issue.
Thank you.
Just to add to Tom that it's in Barranquilla is the same. Like I had 60 drivers interviewed, and out of the 60 had at least 2 motorcycles stolen or confiscated, which is almost the same because they lose it. It's cheaper to buy a new motorcycle, well, a used motorcycle, than to take it out of the impoundment, which is a business of one of the families of the local government. So yeah, but the same happens in Barranquilla. The theft of the motorcycles is more common than the cash type.
I think that the apps are very interesting question because, as I probably discussed with Jackie's, this take back us because what do we want with the popular transport? We want to improve the popular transport. We want to perpetuate job informality. We want to integrate it into the public transport system. So I think that there is a very complicated question to solve that before to start to propose that kind of solutions. It's difficult. It's challenging. Yeah.
I totally agree. And the line I've started using is that we need to solve the problems of popular transportation versus solving the problem that is popular transportation, because we tend to lump it all together. And it's like, you can solve small things that can lead to better services. And I think the research that you guys have shown is kind of that these are assets, right? You ban them and no one can get around, no matter how many buses you have. Or they get to places that the other vehicles cannot get to, or at different times, or trip chaining, not the commute, right? So that understanding them as assets, and then solving the problems attendant to that. The other thing that we tend to do, of course, is it's very paternalistic, right? We're gonna discipline you into the behavior we want, rather than in recruiting them, which is why this research is so important, into their solutions and their concerns and putting that front and center. Jackie makes the point that, higher police salaries are not panacea. Corruption goes all the way up to the heads of, the national government, including manipulating stock prices by declaring tariffs and then moving back. So really, that's kind of a hard ethical question. I think minimizing it would be great. And then having more leaders who are more ethical and think about these things. Interesting, Tom, your point of the democracy, the level of democracy, if we call it, within the Boda rider associations, the stages, and what role that could play too in improving the services. Okay, we've got 5 more minutes, but if there are no more questions in the audience, I am happy to give everyone back 5 minutes of your day. And then thank you so much to our great speakers and Jackie, and thank you to the research network that is PRISM. If you have questions, write us email, subscribe to Pop Transport, visit the PRISM website, and we will be releasing the recording of this session and also the slides so that we'll make those available. And with that, thank you so much, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day, whether that's the rest of your morning or the rest of your evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Benji.
Bye.
Thank you, Benji. Bye-bye.